Showdown at Warg-Tooth Crossing, Chapter 7. Kale walked slowly about the encampment that had been set aside for the wounded. The bandages over his arms and part of his legs were helping to heal his burned flesh. The clerics had magically accelerated his healing, and even said he would have no scars, but it was important for him to keep moving. He felt quite lucky, actually, as he listened to the moans and cries of the men wounded far worse than he was. Luck. What a strange thing. Lucky that the wizard supporting their unit had arrived just in time to save them from complete annihilation at the claws of the Scalies. Not so lucky that the lightning spells they had used managed to kill or wound half his unit as well. Maybe the wizards were just not that good, or maybe they just didn't care. It was a bright sunny day which contrasted all the worse with the smell from the camp. The smell of decayed and rotting flesh, the smell of lingering death. Inadvertently, he turned a corner and came across an enormous pile of amputated limbs. He fell forward to his knees and began retching. Kale shook himself awake and felt bile rising in his throat as he gulped for air. Slowly he sank back into the bed and tried to calm himself. "You okay?" Quinn asked, stirring awake. "Yeah, just a bad dream." Kale looked over at Quinn's face in the morning light coming in the window. A strand of tousled hair fell across her eye. What's Bull gonna think of this?" "What?" "Us, together, last night." "Believe me, he won't care. He provides us for the crew." "Oh, I thought you... I mean, I knew the others did that, but I thought you were his." "I'm nobody's." "Right." Kale paused and asked uncomfortably, "Do I owe you anything then?" "Not a goddamn thing, Kale. I'm a fringe benefit." Quinn shook the covers off, then stood up to begin to dress. Kale couldn't help but admire her curves, highlighted by a sunbeam. He reached over and grabbed her wrist. She glared down at his hand and he promptly removed it. "Look, I didn't mean to offend you. I'm still trying to figure out how things work around here. Come on, relax, will you?" Quinn sighed and sat back down on the bed. "You have anything to smoke?" she asked. "My pipe, sure. You mind?" Kale got out of bed and rustled through his jerkin to get his pipe out and fill it with tobacco. He walked over to the hearth and put some more wood on the embers. Soon he had a fire going again, from which he lit a stick to light the pipe. He brought it back to Quinn and got under the covers to warm up. Quinn took a long drag on the pipe and let it out slowly. "Good tobacco." "Florian." "Nice." "Yeah, not much left, I'm afraid." Quinn handed him back the pipe, and he took a few drags himself. He asked her, "How did you end up here, anyway?" Quinn laughed. "Seriously? Sure, why not?" "Why? After you hear my sad story, are you going to take me away from all this, Kale?" "Hell no, I can't even get myself out of here." "You could leave any time." "Could I?" "Man's got to eat." "So does a woman." "Is that why you're here?" Quinn took the pipe back, and after a long exhale said, "Sure. Actually, I knew Bull from the Steel Crew days. Yeah, I used to hang around the camps too. Well, Bull took a liking to me and brought me along for the crew. To tell the truth, they were pretty decent to the few of us working for them. Better than just whoring around the camp, that's for sure." "Damn, I probably saw you from time to time during the big summer campaign 3 years ago." "Maybe, maybe not. It was around that time that Bull took the crew up to the caves." "He mentioned that." "The girls who wanted to stay on, he took with him. Like I say, the crew was actually pretty decent, so I stayed on. Got to see Cave Town." "Never been there." "It's an interesting place, for sure. You meet all kinds from everywhere there." "Bull said he kept losing men there, that the caves were too dangerous. He said that he took the king's commission to get them out of there, along with the deal to move Somat from the Scalies." "He said that, eh?" "Yeah." "Well, it's pretty smart. You can bet that he knew there was Somat to be had down here, but no one had the organization to pull it off. He did, but when he got his ace in the hole, well, that's what really decided it. I was there the night he got it." "You mentioned that once before. What is it?" Quinn took another long drag on the pipe and savored the tobacco, exhaling slowly. She handed the pipe back to Kale, then said, "Shit. Look, I get to pick sometimes who in the crew I'll sleep with. I picked you because you're easy on the eyes, and I knew you weren't rough. But my life is pretty comfortable as is, and I'm not going to do anything to screw that up. I've got a big mouth is all. I shouldn't have said anything. Feel free to ask Bull himself if you really want to know. I mean, he's used it a few times, so it's not like it's a secret or anything. I would just rather you found out from someone else. She got up and started dressing again. I should go. We need to lay on some breakfast. Okay. You know, you're pretty easy on the eyes yourself. Oh, sweetie. Quinn leaned over and kissed him. Maybe I should give you something special next time. Kale glanced at her sideways, then started to get dressed himself. Hello? Kale knocked on the door. You home, Arris? Yes, I am. Come on in. I'm just busy in the back. Kale walked into Arris's home. It was an adobe building with 2 rooms, a main one in the front with a kitchen, table, bed, and hearth, and a rear room which Kale couldn't see. The place was tidy and well kept, but contained second-hand and makeshift items. It smelled exotic, like a spice store Kale had once visited in Visbane, yet different. In some ways it smelled powerful. Is that you, Kale? I'll be right out. I'm just finishing off this tincture. Yep, it's me. What brings you to my humble abode? I had a good breakfast and found myself with nothing else to do today. I thought I'd pay you a visit and see what our local apothecary was up to. How cordial. Right now I'm just in the final stages of setting some tincture of sporin. It's very good for reducing infection in wounds, and Bull needs an endless supply of it. At least he pays well. Kale could hear some more rustling from the back, and then Arris emerged, rubbing his hands. He went to a wash basin and washed, then dried them with a conveniently placed towel. It looks like you have everything in here right where you need it. It's not the academy, but it does do not too badly, Arris said, looking around. The adobe stays surprisingly warm in winter and cool in summer, too. Can I offer you a drink? I can make tea. No thanks. Mind if I sit? Just a tiny bit hungover. Kale pointed to a chair. Of course not. Make yourself at home. I must tell you, though, that I hadn't intended on staying long. There's some late-blooming crocus I wanted to gather up along the river, just downstream of the town. I'll come with you then and help, Kale said, standing up. If nothing else, I can keep the scalies from killing you again. Arris smirked and shook his head. Okay, give me just a minute and we'll be off. After a moment, Arris had his ever-present satchel and a new, at least to him, wide-brim hat. The two walked out of town along the river. So, how are things going working for Bull? Arris asked as he scanned the shoreline. I just started, so it's hard to say. I got back from going to the Toth village last night. It was really strange. Oh, look, an owl feather. Arris reached down to grab the feather and put it in his satchel. Excuse me, I get distracted. I was just saying that it was really strange being surrounded by Toth that weren't trying to kill me. Although at one point things seemed to get a little dicey. The trade went off okay, though. We did lose a man to giant scorpions, unfortunately, on the way there. Giant scorpions. Nasty creatures. You didn't happen to collect any of their venom, did you? Gods, no. Next time, if possible, bring me back the dead bodies, especially if the stingers are intact. Very valuable. I can make some serious potions with that venom. I'll keep that in mind for next time. But as I think about it, what do you know about mushrooms? Quite a bit, actually. Why? I saw something interesting in the Toth village. What did you see? Arris stopped scanning to look directly at Kale. It was when I went behind some of their mounds to take a piss. They had a whole field flooded instead of just irrigated, and also completely covered with cloth tarps. I think they were growing mushrooms for somat. Very interesting. I suppose that's possible. I always thought the somatal mushroom grew with ambient dry air, but in a shaded, moist place. That's what makes it so rare. Maybe the Toth have just found a way to cultivate it. They wouldn't want to flood the field, though, just keep it moist. And they would need shade. Perhaps that's what the tarps were for. If they figured all that out, it would explain why they can trade so much somat. Way easier to grow it than roam around trying to find it. Anyway, one of them saw me there and almost fought me. It seems they'd rather keep this to themselves. Makes sense. It's the one thing they have that the outside world wants. That makes it valuable for trade. Yeah, I guess. Kale glanced over. You ever do somat, Arris? Arris started walking along again. No, not somat, but there is a related drug called Cyban. I do take that from time to time to help with my meditation. It's a very powerful experience. Kale looked sideways at Arris. Just for meditation? Arris looked up at the sky, then back at the riverbank. I do make a drink with weakened Cyban, coffee, and ginger. It isn't easy living in this god-forsaken town. Whiskey's less complicated, and probably better for you. You've never tried my special drink. Nope. I'll just stick to whiskey. And coffee, of course. Plain black coffee. Can't live without coffee. Amen, Arris agreed. Ah, look, here we are. Arris bent down and began to pick at crocus flowers and put them in a jar he'd retrieved from his satchel. Kale bent down with him to help. Anything special you need to do to pick the flowers? Kale asked. Actually, I'm just picking the stigma. You see these crimson threads here inside the flower? Yes, just pick those. I use them to make saffron, which is a nice spice in itself, but like so many other spices, has other useful properties for potions. Kale did as Arris asked, and before long, they had worked their way through a large patch of crocus flowers and had filled up Arris's jar. They found a shady place along the shore, and Kale filled his wineskin from the river for a drink. He pulled out some jerky from a pocket and offered some to Arris, who gratefully accepted. Did you give any thought to talking to Bull about minding the men's behavior a little better? Honestly, Arris, I just got there. As soon as I signed up, Bull had me going on that run down south to the Scaly Village, and we just got back last night. Besides, sure, I knew Bull from before, but he's a big man now, and I'm just a lackey working for him. Maybe so, but it wouldn't hurt to try. It might. Bull might take offense to me, suggesting how to run things. I honestly believe that when people are presented with a rational argument, they will come around if talked to respectfully and honestly. You really do, don't you? I do. You're a very smart man, Arris. You know a lot about mushrooms and crocuses, and about wall of fire illusions even. But you unfortunately don't know a lot about human nature. Humans aren't built the way you think they are, Arris. We are animals at heart, with just enough smarts to make us truly dangerous. If you want to convince a man to do something, you need to find out what he wants, and then see that he gets it for doing just that. If you want to convince a man to do something, you need to find out what he wants, and then see that he gets it for doing what you want. You will never convince people to do things just because they are the right thing to do. Arris took a bite of jerky and sighed. Perhaps, Kale, but I must try. Even in the face of insurmountable odds, trying is still better than not trying, so all I ask is that you try. Now it was Kale's turn to sigh. You're a hard man in your own way, Arris. I'll look to see if there's an opportunity to bring this up when Bull is in a good mood, and I'm not promising anything, but I will look for the chance. That's all I can ask. I know you're a man who can bring forth great violence, but I also see that you don't lust for it. It is not rational to reduce violence with more violence. That's why I asked you. Maybe, but it wouldn't hurt if you could bring some violence to the table along with your rationality, Arris. One of these days, these guys are going to have too much fun at your expense, and you're going to get hurt. I wish you could defend yourself directly, not just by being useful. Who says I can't defend myself? A wall of fire illusion can scare off some scalies, but it isn't really force, is it? Maybe not, but you might be surprised at what illusions can do, especially when cast by a high-level practitioner. Also, you really don't want to piss off an alchemist who has access to your drinking water. Arris reached into the stream, cupping his hand to bring up some water. He offered the hand to Kale as it dribbled out. Kale laughed. By the gods, I suppose not. Arris chuckled as well, then looked up at the sun. We should start heading back, Kale. I need to set these crocus stigmas to dry, along with a whole lot of other things. The town apothecary's work is never done. Kale stood and stretched up in agreement. They both began walking back in the late afternoon sun, shadows following beside them. When they got back to Arris' adobe house, one of the barmaids was outside waiting for him. She saw Kale and started to move off until Arris called to her. Melissa, did you need something? Kale was just helping me with, He looked at Kale, who scowled back at him. Just helping me. But he has to go right away. Why don't you come inside? Melissa looked at Kale, then at Arris. She walked up to Arris and whispered in his ear. I see, said Arris. Yes, I can take care of that. Go on inside, Melissa, and I'll be right with you. The young woman didn't meet Kale's eyes, and instead stepped through the door into Arris's home. Arris closed the door behind her, leaving Kale and himself outside. Everything okay? Do you, use her services? Goodness, no, nothing like that. No, she has a common enough problem that I can help her with. Lots of folks in this town come to me with their problems. I do what I can, whenever I can. Sometimes folks just want an ear to listen, and a shoulder to cry on. Life isn't easy. No, it certainly isn't. Anything I can do to help? Arris smiled. Thanks, but no, I've got this. Arris looked at the door and gave a long exhale. But I'm going to have a little Cybin mixture afterwards. This always makes me sad. With that, Arris nodded to Kale, then opened the door, entered, and quietly closed it. Kale stood there pondering. He wondered about the misfortunes and misery that passed right under his nose. A noise from the toad broke his reverie, and he looked up. It seemed the boys were at it early tonight. Kale started towards the toad to get some supper, though truth be known, he could have used a little quiet right now. Maybe there would be a chance to talk to Bull, though. Maybe.